Well, unfortunately, in our modern culture, we have this tendency to fixate on an issue and obsess over it until we get bored with it and move on. And I'm not necessarily I don't necessarily have an issue with the fact that we tend to move on from issues. The problem is that we tend to move on from issues in a way that's more related to us getting bored with the issue rather than it being resolved or us deciding it's just not important enough for us to focus our attention on. It's mostly like we make a big deal out of something until we get tired of making a big deal out of it, and then we move on to something else. And that's the case with the Charlie Kirk thing right now. I don't want to imply that Charlie Kirk's assassination is any less important than what most of us believe that it is. It feels like a turning point in the politics and news and media coverage of events in our country right now. It feels like it's going to be something that shifts things in a slightly more positive direction. But at the same time, there will come a point where people get tired of talking about Charlie Kirk and it's going to move on to something else. And it's not going to be because we've resolved the issue. It's going to be because people they're just bored. It's not stimulating enough anymore. Now, when it comes to people saying things about the issue and trying to fix the issue, there are a couple of different ways that you can handle that. And I personally believe that Jimmy Kimmel being canceled from his show for saying things about Charlie Kirk is wrong. But it's a more nuanced discussion than that because, like everything I talk about on this channel, there is no clear-cut, obvious solution to the problem. So what is the problem? Well, the problem is that you have a guy getting up on national television claiming things that aren't true. Because and he should know that he shouldn't make statements about them because they aren't true. But a lot of people are trying to claim, well, he's a comedian and it was jokes and this and that. And it's like, okay, maybe. My point here isn't to cover whether what he said is correct or not correct. The point here is, should he have been canceled from his show for saying the things that he said? Now, as somebody who advocates for free speech as a default, I think we can all, I think I am like most of you where I feel that free speech is something where you should be able to say whatever you want to say up until the point where you're starting to, actively encourage people to do illegal things like, stealing, violence, murder, all that kind of stuff. Up until that point where your words are actively putting people in danger, you should be able to say whatever you want to say. Nobody has to like it. But we should all accept that you have the right to say it, and we may not like you because you say it, but you should be able to say it. Now, that being said, when it comes to being an employee with a company, well, as much as people don't want to hear it, your employer does have some authority over what you're allowed to say when you're at work. Now, when you're on your off time and you say whatever you want to say, well, the default response from a company should be, well, they were on their own time. They weren't representing us when they said it. What they say on their own time is their own time, and that's just the end of it. Too many companies want too much control over your personal time. And so, if you work for a company that, wants to punish you for publishing tweets or publishing this or whatever that, as long as you're not on the clock when you did it, we really need to have a law that protects firing for exercising free speech outside of work. I don't care what your position is within a company. If you're making sure that you're not representing your company when you say it, then your company shouldn't have anything to do with it. However, when you're on live television or, recorded television being published over, television, airwaves, and cable and the internet, and you say certain things, well, then now we've crossed over that line into, well, the company has a right to control what you say while you're working for them. And this is where we kind of get into that nuanced discussion of free speech versus what are the rights of the company that you work for. I'm not a fan of, I generally tend to be on the workers' side of things when it comes to this kind of stuff because I'm just not a big fan of people who are in positions of power and feel that they are entitled to exercise that power however they feel. And big companies and even medium-sized companies tend to want to do that. You've all had a boss that comes in and has a power trip all the time because, oh, I'm in control. I get to do what I want. And so most of the time I will lean in error towards the employee because they're not in a position of power, and most of the time they're not able to just walk away from their job because their job sucks. You kind of end up having to suck it up and just deal with it. But in this case, there are certain expectations, whether spoken or not, that when you are working for somebody else You are their representative anytime you're doing anything that interfaces with the public. So if you're a cashier at Burger King, you are representing your company while you're standing there at the front desk taking orders from the customers. If the customers hear you talking a bunch of crap about one side of the political spectrum or the other, you are now in a representative fashion for Burger King saying things that may turn the customers off and drive customers away and make them not want to come to that store anymore because you are being a nuisance to them because they don't want to hear all that crap. They just came in for a burger and they just want to get their burger and leave. Or they want to get their burger, sit down and enjoy their meal and enjoy the ambiance that Burger King, at least back in the day, used to provide. So when it comes to whether you're working for a company, and especially the hard delineation of are you on the clock or are you off the clock, and whether you're salaried or not, there are times of the day where you are working and representing your company, and there are times of the day where you're off and you're not associated with your company anymore. You're doing your own thing. Anytime you're doing your own thing, you're free to say whatever you want within the bounds of the law, and you should be protected in a way that allows you to do that stuff. And if we don't have laws that, like, the First Amendment should be enough. It really, really should. It should be enough. But unfortunately, we live in a system where we've piled law upon law upon law upon law, and unless you are a lawyer who is well versed in a specific area of the law, you're not really going to know what different laws interact and make the situation the way that it is versus how we think it should be. I know I didn't say that very well. What I'm trying to say is that while the First Amendment should make it very clear that you can say what you want to say, we've put so many different laws in place that adjust the First Amendment that the average person doesn't really know what the law is, right? Because we've just complicated it so much. So what I'm saying is that we do need to have laws in place that make it so that companies have no ability to do anything to you. They can't fire you. They can't demote you. They can't lower your pay rate. They can't impose any kind of negative or positive status change to you because you said something when you're not on their time, right? But when you are on their time, this is a voluntary collaboration that you're having with your employer. And in general, the expectation is that while you're actively engaging in that collaboration, and especially if you're a representative out in the public where people are going to know that you're connected to them and you're working for them at the time, then, well, you need to control what you say. And you need to make sure that what you're saying doesn't reflect badly on the company that you're working for, because that has a negative effect on the company when they associate the things that you say with the company because you are their representative. Now, I know there's a lot of people who don't want to hear that. You want to be able to say what you want to say. And I agree that you should be able to say what you want to say. I believe that if you want to say something at your job and you don't like it, that you should never be legally affected by that. The government should never be able to come in unless you're, engaging in clearly illegal, like hate speech and incitement to violence and yelling fire in a crowded theater or something that puts people in danger, like obviously those things. But anything up to that point, there should never be any legal repercussions. However, if the company decides that they don't want to deal with the negative consequences that they're going to have to deal with because of what you said at your job or on their time while you're interfacing with customers, or you put out a tweet while you're working, this is the nuance that people need to understand. Okay, so here's what I want. Here's the summary, the very clear, crystal clear way that I think that you should think about it, and you can kind of process it in your brain and decide if you agree. You should be able to say whatever you want to say that isn't illegal at any time except while you're at work, except at any time where you're representing your company in a way where the people around you know that you're representing the company. And the company should have some measure of control over how you make them look to the customers, to their customers and potential customers. And if their choice is to remove you from the company because you've shown yourself to be a net negative impact on their company, they have every right to do so. And we as customers and as citizens and all of that should not really have a negative viewpoint of that. It's natural to want to defend what you have against people who are trying to tear down, who are either trying or by accident tearing down what you've built up. And that's reasonable. So that's kind of the end of it. there's still more nuance that we could get into with that, but that's really the basics of what we want to talk about. Now, do the media organizations that these people work for deserve your sympathy? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. They all engage in the same kind of stuff. My point here was not to defend the network. My point here was to point out the nuance of this specific situation of Jimmy Kimmel said some things that made the network look bad. And their response was, well, we're going to set you aside for a little bit because you're making us look bad and we don't want to take any more heat for this. And when you take away your stigma of networks and all of that stuff and your stigma of companies, company bad, employee good, all of that stuff, and you just look at it from a rational, logical perspective, you start to understand that the decision that they made in and of itself was reasonable and it was correct. And they had every right to do it, and that's just kind of the end of it. Now, if you want to paint it as, you know, people trying to oppress free speech, well, no, I'm sorry. Companies have a right to control what their employees say while they are an official representative of that organization. When you're on your free time, you can say what you want. But when you're at your job, there are certain expectations, and we all understand them, even if we don't actively think about them. So that's all I wanted to say. Hit that like button, subscribe to help us reach our first 1,000 subscribers, and I'll see you for the next one.